post-colonial indignation that some of us may have over what we should return and not return. There's the realities of exhibition, preservation, curation, and the things that the great museums can do that countries that don't have the same resources may not be able to do.
Is it worth the risk?
Is it worth the risk? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it is.
Why is that?
Well, given this one condition that I didn't get universal agreement upon earlier is taken into consideration, or if this condition can be satisfied, which is its emotional meaning to the people involved. Very recent example would be actually within the United Kingdom, the stone of Scone, spelled Scone. It's a historic coronation stone on which would kneel the kings of Scotland when Scotland was an independent country. It was taken by English conquerors to Westminster Abbey and used in the coronation of British kings from then on, and English kings. It was stolen just before the coronation of our present Queen by some Scottish nationalists and taken away, but was recovered by the police and brought back. Under a recent British government, it's been returned to Scotland, and it's part of the appurtenances of the new semi-autonomous Scottish Parliament. That seems to me to make absolute sense. It means something to them. It has a continuous presence in their history. People would always have felt it unnatural for it to be colonial or conquered property.
Do you think it's a good thing they gave the Lydian hoard back, even though it was stolen?
Well, I mean, you make it hard for one to say that enthusiastically. Yeah. Incidentally,
I would take it even.
Could I just ask, what is the epoch of that jewelry?
It's about 2,500 years old.
Oh, wonderful.
It's very, very beautiful. And it's also one of the many civilizations that lie beneath the soil of Turkey that really doesn't have a connection to modern-day Turkish culture at all.
But that's why I would take a contra view. I mean, I do think there's great empathy for the return of things to people for whom those things still have great meaning. In fact, in this country, we've passed a law to require museums to do that. It's called NAGPRA, the Native American Grave Repatriation Act. So sacred things and human remains, mostly in natural history museums, have been given back to Native Americans when it can be proved, in fact, that there is a connection between those people. And that's partly because there's a living relationship with those things. The problem in with most ancient cultures around the world is that these things, Sharon mentioned that there isn't a living relationship with these things. There may be some national political pride in the return of these. That political pride would probably be felt by those in the dominant political position in Turkey. I don't think the Kurds in Turkey, for example, would feel that same way. And when we identify something as Greek or Italian or Turkish or whatever,
they've been there longer than the Turks have.
Yeah, the Kurds, yeah, for sure. So you run into this problem of ethno-nationalism, of something that is defining of a national culture on the basis of the dominant power. So if there were an immigrant, and that immigrant, let's say, came from Central Asia, who wasn't Turkic, but he came from someplace in Central Asia, or let's say it was an African, did he feel the same way toward these things or to other kinds of things? I think we have to be very careful about racializing, as Christopher said earlier, racializing this thing. It's the political construct of what is cultural property. It's not a scientific one. It's not a racial one. It's whatever those in power in Turkey feel to be their property. They don't do the same with the Kurds, for example. You know, that isn't important to what it means, that power in Turkey thinks it means to be Turkish.
What about looting? Looting seems to be really at the heart of this whole thing when it comes to more modern works. How do you prevent looting? Restitution, does that stop looting, or a bar on trade?
Yeah, well, I think, how do you stop looting? It's a very good question. And that's really been the subject of these lawsuits that we've seen over more recent, when I say recent, over things that were taken over the past 40 years, including the Lydian hoard. That's the kind of lawsuits that we've seen that Italy has filed against the Getty criminal charge. And what's not really a lawsuit, what they've done actually is played much more hardball than just a lawsuit against an institution. What they've done is they have criminal charges that are against a former curator herself. So you have one curator, Marion True, who's still
19.
Today on trial for charges of fraud and things having to do with having acquired stolen antiquities for the Getty. So you have a career curator, Harvard educated, spent 24 years as an esteemed member of the art and academic community, did lots of great things for Greece and Italy as their partner, and as somebody who had devoted her life to that, so now finds herself on criminal trial for having not lined her own pockets, but for having essentially done her job the way she believed was acceptable by the norms of the time, more or less. And so the Getty, and this was done very consciously by the Italian government as leverage to get the Getty to return pieces that they wanted back. So it was part of a campaign to stem looting and smuggling from Italy itself, and I think that it has succeeded in stopping museums essentially from buying antiquities. I think the antiquities collecting is down to a trickle at most major museums. You can counter that if you think that's not true. It's certainly true at the Getty, statistically speaking. And I think it has stemmed looting in Italy. And the question is there another way other than, because her, Marion True's life is really ruined, her career is ruined, her reputation is over, she lost her job, and she's financially ruined as well. So that seems to me a particularly sad outcome for a fight over 2,000 or 2,000-year-old objects. It seems very 2,200-year-old objects, very very sad. And isn't there another way? But it has stemmed looting, and at the same time, looting is still absolutely rampant in Iraq, in places like Albania, where there's very little supervision, places like Bulgaria, where it has lots and lots of untouched places where Greek treasures can be found. So looting goes on because people want beautiful stuff, and they always will, and there are measures to stem it, but I don't think you can ever cut it off completely.
Well, what about countries like Turkey where looting continues, and to some degree also in Italy? Does that somehow negate their rights to demand things back if they can't keep track of their own stuff?
Well, I think so, actually, yeah. I think if they can't control looting in their own country, then I think that they completely undermine their own argument that they ought to have things returned to them. That's my question.
Yeah, I want to underline and emphasize that with reference to the behavior of the Turkish authorities in occupied Cyprus. In the island of Cyprus, what they call the footprints of civilization, the traceable evolution of different humans, so is as long and continuous. It's an archaeologist's paradise, almost as good as China in that respect. You can see thousands of years proceeding in an orderly way after one another. And after the illegal Turkish invasion and occupation of the northern tier of the island in 1974, a huge number of mainly Greek but also some Armenian Orthodox churches with wonderful icons and been systematically, in a very organized way, just denuded. Anything of value has just been amputated and taken out, turns up on the open market. The government of Cyprus, where it can, tries to buy these things back. It's rather humiliating. Sometimes prosecutions can be and have been brought. But really, it's an international disgrace because all of this is being done under the cover of law by an actual recognized government member of the United Nations, a candidate member of the European Union, and a member of NATO. I think it should be subjected to sanctions for doing this.
I mean, the looting is a very complicated situation because, as Sharon says, as Christopher says, it's not, looting is not an idle pastime. I mean, it isn't a couple of people with those metal detectors out there, on holiday, and it's not a choice that one makes. Am I going to be a doctor or a looter? It's typically because there are failed circumstances in which one lives. It's either because your life has been ruined by warfare, sectarian violence, by poverty, by corruption. You're eking out a living in some certain way. The looters themselves are not being rewarded as the organized crime people are who take from the looters and so forth. So we have to realize that stopping it at the borders, policing the site, growing an alternative economy, all these things are very, very important to stop this. And no one condones looting. It's the destruction of knowledge. It'll never be restored. Once these things are wrenched from the ground, you've lost any knowledge that could be gained from the context in which they would have been found and excavated. But there once was a